this conference, and they had a couple different investments that they were pitching. One was coconuts. I think I maybe mentioned that. Their business plan is to basically sell a hectare of land, or you can buy it in different sizes, and then they have coconut trees that are planted on the land. You buy the land, you own the trees, and they, as a management fee, harvest the coconuts off the trees using local labor in this area, which I think was Brazil. And they have apps in place to let you see what your harvest was, and then those coconuts go to market, and that's your return on your investment. And so I think
what they sell for at market?
Yeah. So you invest like $60,000 into this land. I think was around their entry price, 60 or 70,000, and then they had rates of return on the coconut harvest and how many trees come out, and they were using modern science to get good sized coconuts and the types of trees that they planted, blah blah blah. And then this other investment that they had was in neem, which I hadn't heard of before, but it's kind of similar to the what was in that article, some sort of local. Let's see. Oh, I was thinking there was a link. There we go. So there's this tree that's native in Brazil, I think. Or this is Southeast Asia? Maybe I thought everything they had was in Brazil. And they have found it to be a natural pesticide. And so with the world going more green towards things and less use of chemical pesticides, this is the seed that comes off that plant. And so again, it's kind of similar. You buy a plot of land and they help harvest this natural product off of this neem tree, and it's starting to be used in, they had said, if you start to look for it in some like moisturizer and other things, there's multiple purposes for it. So that got me thinking about this article too, that how does capitalism and international trade and all of that work or whatever, we snatch them, we sit down, figure out their formula, and they say, well, this is the product we've been using, take it back to the laboratory, dissect it, and make millions off of it. What do you think? Is that an issue or not?
The way you describe it sounds unethical.
Okay. Yeah, I'd say there's some ethical questions embodied in it.
Plagiarism, like not writing anything. You're taking something without giving credit where it's due. So it's like not fair to the poor. Who you're taking it from, they're not necessarily poor, but whatever. Or devil's advocate, you're using all these things to meet a need, and in medicine cases save lives. So
That's a good thing, yeah.
For the people that discovered it hundreds of thousands of years ago, that they were doing it in ancient methods for free, obviously compensated for it, you're spending dollars on it.
And if their culture is such that they wouldn't normally go outside of their little island, as I like to say, right? Then did they do anything bad anyway?
At the same time, those people should probably be rewarded when they're discovery.
Brings up a lot of complex, thorny issues, doesn't it? Like, they have their ethics system, we have our ethics system, we have more of a market system, they don't. We want to trade with them because we think there's mutually beneficial stuff going on with trade. We bring value to the table. They have existing processes. I mean, it's all an interesting mix of things. So when we get into intellectual property rights, things get a little different. It opens up more gray area, I think. There's a lot of professors, even here at OU, this is being stirred about a bit with the development of higher technologies on if we bring the classroom to the online environment, or if I develop a class and it's get used, can they just use, does OU have the rights to the material on, you know, if I do some lecture capture of what we're doing today, or do I maintain those rights? And should I be paid a little bit of money if they continue to educate kids long after Russ McCullough's gone with my stuff? Should I have a vested interest in that? If so, how is it defined? Can I will that property, that intellectual property, off to my kids so that they have an income stream? Should there be limits to how long that income stream is in place? You can see we kind of open up Pandora's box into like, I don't know. And it's all the more weird if that's just staying within our nation's boundaries. If we start to go over to Brazil and Australia and the back country and start to communicate and attempt to trade, or some people might attempt to steal, who's going to be the judge? You know, do we turn to the World Trade Organization and other, the UN or somebody else?
Talking about over your econ videos.
What's that?
We're still talking about over your econ videos.
We're just talking about the issue in general. What do you think?
Are we on video?
Yeah.
Are we on video? Yes, we are on video right now.
I know, I have to remind myself that.
Don't worry about that. This is still meant to be academic freedom, a free flow of ideas.
Yeah, but if we start selling it, then people down the road 50 years from now will hear our stupid comments.
Technically, if you're getting rights on bad ideas.
So,
If you were to get rights to the lecture capture videos, does that make us employees since we are directly working with you?
I don't know. That's what I mean.
And
We got
technically also assisted in making, as you said, assisted in making it. We'd also be kind of part of it. Like,
or should it all be for the public good, since there's spillover effects for knowledge spillovers?
I mean, really, you're getting into
well, I mean, YouTube is free, but they still pay people to advertisers, so I think we can work something out with that.
Out. And what'd you say, Dylan? We get this out of the book anyway? And so we had property rights established, right? You guys paid for your subscriptions with the book, and
Actually, that's like a very good point. You're not just getting this information, you can also get to provide it in the book, but it's actually
that's right. Yeah, that's definitely part of it. Kind of relaying part of information that in an existing body of knowledge that's there, right? But is there rights in how you put the stuff together? Yeah, there is kind of, right? I mean, there's how a curriculum's designed. If you've got one static book and kind of how you deliver it, and maybe other things that you bring to the table, that's unique too. So there's value add to that.
It's a very big, happy circle of plagiarism and copyright infringement.
Yeah. All right, so that just kind of brings the issues as we start to dive deeper into these, into international trade. That there's no easy answers. So what happened? This chapter is focusing in on arguments to put up barriers to trade, and these are this last section we're going to look at is on some stuff that the United States has in place. So there is on the books the possibility for the United States to put up a tariff. And one of those is through, well, they're doing it to us or some sort of protection. So a countervailing duty, so duty-free zones, if you guys have traveled through the airports and stuff, that means kind of a tax-free zone. So the tariff can be thought of as a duty. So if another country is subsidizing production, like we had that Brazil case that we looked at, the little game theory case that we did, I think, last chapter. Maybe we can say, oh, we're going to put up a tariff because that's not fair that they're subsidizing. And so that's the idea of a countervailing duty. So how do we define a subsidy?
Good question.
Payment from the government to
Doesn't even have
their price.
What's that, Max? You don't think it has to be a payment?
No, there's so many indirect aids nowadays. You'd have to go way down.
Oh, but it's still technically a payment.
Yeah.
Some sort of assistance.
Where do you draw a line? What's not helping? What is, and that's like.
But definitely the government, it's not in a negative way, right? So it's some sort of assistance to a domestic producer.
What's your time
So this is what the WTO and the Uruguay round, how they defined it. So even extending it to loans, low interest loans, some sort of tax treatment. So we'll lower your tax rate if you do this particular type of activity. So there's lots of fuzziness surrounding that, which of course makes it pretty difficult then to argue how or why it's coming, making it easier for industries to argue for a tariff. Because a countervailing duty is to say, hey, this country is doing this. Did you know I just had some attorney dig through the stuff in Indonesia and found out that the Indonesian government is doing this to this particular industry, which gives me the right to get a tariff. And again, it isn't something easy to pin down. All right, so countervailing duty. Dumping. Anti-dumping duty. Hey, you dump on us, we're going to put a tariff on it. That's not fair. You're just using your power. So
what an example of like dumping?
Selling below cost.
So selling below cost, so whatever the product, give me a product, any product. Crayons. All right. So crayons are coming over. So we have Crayola, that's an American company, and all of a sudden these well, maybe that's a bad example because I'm trying to figure something good. But some crayon producer comes over, and this might work. Is selling them at $1 a piece, and Crayola has theirs. You know, if you've bought it for some little tots, that those things aren't cheap. They're running $5 a piece for a little box of crayons, right? So
They also burn for 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's why.
Seriously, your lights go out. One Crayola will burn for 30 minutes. They sit on the science website.
Cool.
with a flame.
That's going to
If you light it, it'll light the light stay lit for 30 minutes. So you can make a Crayola.
It's a Crayola candle, which is nice.
I don't know, but
That's what it smells.
Anyway, sorry, that's all.
So how do we establish what the fair value is?
Okay.
So if that foreign country's dumping them for $1 and Crayola's crying, they're saying, well, that's not, well, they're selling below cost.
There's
Well, how do you know that?
There's an alternative form of fuel.
Okay. Let's
This is
get away from
fascinating.
the fuel argument. How do we establish fair value?
Well, it's really easy when we have a supply and demand curve. Otherwise, it's more complicated.
Okay. Do companies ever dump their product below cost?
I'm sure.
If they need to get rid of excess inventory or whatever.
Does that happen often or not too often?
Not very often. It's a pretty bad business model.
What do you think, Taylor? Yeah, I tend to agree with you, I
I
think.
mean, like, you know, they have a whole bunch of product left on the shelves and they're being, like, in their company that they can't get rid of, and they have to drop the prices to get rid of it.
Just
Because
cut
it's
the
more
price,
expensive
yeah.
To hold on to it and have that space taken up.
Especially, yeah, if the holding cost is expensive, right?
I know that when I worked at Target, we had books that didn't sell. We would rip off the title, like the front, like cover page of it, put it in the recycling bin. It went to a distribution center. They would re-bind the book, and then it went to Walmart for a cheaper price.
Huh. Yep.
So
So I think you're right that if you look at businesses, they're often selling at below cost for that last marginal good, which differentiates economics from other disciplines, right? On average, they're earning a profit probably. They started with a high markup of the product cost was, let's say, $100. They priced it at $200. They sold a whole bunch. They made some money. They dropped the price to $150. There's still a few left. They dropped the price to $90 to get it off the shelves. So at the margin, there's product that's being sold like that all the time. And so is that fair to do? Well, sure, it's their decision. I mean, so it becomes hard to tell whether they're doing it maliciously to try to stomp out competition, or whether it's just a course of normal business. That can open up a gray area. Because what's something's total cost that was into it doesn't mean that it's not a wise decision to sell it below cost now, right? So kind of some subjectivism in what that cost is. So when we see cheap products coming across, it's an easy argument to say, oh, they're not being fair, they're pricing below cost, see? And then they'll say, well, we had excess inventory, so that's why we were selling it. So that's not something that's easy to pin down. So it's been less and less of an argument over time. Companies haven't pursued that one as much. All right, any other last questions or comments on that one? Okay, give that a read. Maybe the last comment on this last bullet, what does that mean?
Is that kind of like when access type I went in to cover off redistribute it?
No, I don't think it's quite that. So this is very similar to how lawsuits work. Some of you guys have business law, right? What do you remember about whether you have a rightful claim against somebody? What must have happened for you to sue them and have a chance of winning?
If you exploited or something?
There has to be some sort of damage.
Yeah.
There has to be material damages. Yeah, there has to be some sort of damages to you. You can't just sue people because, you have to prove that you lost some money because of it. That's kind of what this is saying here. We can't just claim that, well, that's not fair, they're doing this. You have to show that there was material damage done because of it. So that puts a little more burden on the person who's claiming foul play, that they have to prove it to go the next level. Escape clause. What does this sound like to you?
Distraction or something?
Gene, what do you think? What does this sound like to you?
Kind of sounds like maybe a way to help out, like maybe during like a recession in the country or something.
And kind of a crisis type short-term thing, right? Yeah. So something's going on. I don't have all the details. I can't prove material damage, but here's the deal. This all came in. I'm getting hurt. Let's just give some time to figure this out, right? So it's almost like a moratorium. You guys know what a moratorium is? On building. the moratorium can be more general, but sometimes cities might be trying to figure out how they want to change building codes, right? And so they will put a moratorium on new construction until they figure it out. This happened in Ames for a while I can't remember what the circumstances were, but they were switching over building codes, and so they didn't actually do it, but that was one option that was brought up at the city council was, well, maybe we should just put a moratorium on building for the next 6 months. And then luckily some people said, oh, wait a second, that's dumb. Let's not stop construction just so that we can drag our feet and figure it out, and it'll probably drag on another 6 months. But kind of temporary relief. So this is part of what's on the books as a possibility for getting some restrictions in place. So the petitioning firm must show that it has been harmed. Again, is that easy to measure? No, not really.
Does that go before an international committee for like international hearing, or?
We're going to get to that, but yes, I guess is the long story short. And in order to initiate this, in fact, it might be the next slide here. So the U.S. Trade Representative, we have a person in place that's there to monitor this stuff. So that's kind of our governing body. That's our mechanism in place to try to watch for all of that stuff that we just mentioned. That's the government official that's going to put that stuff in place. All right. So how do people do on this stuff? Is there a policeman that is watching for lawbreakers? So 90 countries identified 52 of the 90 as lacking adequate enforcement of some of these policies. So not an easy answer. It's one thing to sit to the table and come to an agreement, and it's another thing to police it, right? We see this happen all the time in our local municipalities and states. We pass a law on the books, but then how does it get enforced? We need a police force. They need to be beating the streets. They need to be knocking on doors. They need to do this. Well, we only have limited resources. So it's kind of the same old story at on a world level. So what's a sanction? Economic sanctions. You heard of sanctions? You can think of it in other contexts. It's really the same here. Similar meaning.
It's basically a forced embargo or something else on another country. Like these countries will boycott from importing your stuff up to a certain point as punishment for you doing
Okay. Dylan?
Is it like some kind of like you keep people from things like restriction?
A restriction, yeah. It's kind of a rule or a law in place. So more generally, you kind of jumped into some examples of it, but different ways that we can kind of try to punish the other country that we don't agree with. So give that a read. You guys ever wonder why it's so hard to get a Cuban cigar? That's why. So that was our trade sanctions, basically rules against Cuba.
Why do we not like Cuba again?
Oh, we don't like that Fidel Castro. We think that he's a little oppressive with his people, and dictator type stuff. All from the Cold War.
Cuban Missile Crisis and all that?
Yeah, Cuban Missile Crisis, 1964, John F. Kennedy.
We're still.
Yeah, we're still embargoing. Cold
Yeah.
War taking up on
Yeah, I'd like to think that that's going to be changed because Fidel Castro's, at least he hasn't died yet, right? But he's getting close. But then his son is kind of taking over, but his son seemed a little more open for change. So yeah, that is sanctions. Here's how sanctions works. So some economists have looked at the data on whether sanctions were effective. So over here is the goal of the sanction. We just had some sort of policy change. We want to destabilize the current government, disrupt the military adventure, impair military potential, and then maybe some other reasons, whatever, something has to get lumped in. So since World War I, number of cases, number of how, I don't know how they exactly measured successes, but you know, they had some sort of objective in mind. 21 cases, 11 successes. 18, 6. 10, 2. 20, 5. What do you think? Effective? Not particularly, right? And remember that when we have sanctions in place, are we tending to increase the volume of international trade or decrease it? Decrease. So these are barriers, right? I mean, we're purposely erecting sometimes big barriers like Cuba, no trade, period, right? And we've learned about the advantages of trade. So what this does is it kind of takes a different look at it and says, well, you know, maybe there's not trade, but it's worth it because we were needing these things addressed. Well, what turned out was that these things aren't really succeeding too well in getting changed either. So kind of iffy on the results for sanctions. Iran is on the table right now. I told you guys about the tariff in Iran, right? Tariff rate? That was the 105, the Mercedes-Benz. Yeah, we talked about that. Okay, so this is kind of continuing along kind of the same stream. So where we're at, chapter-wise, Chapter 9 is going to be kind of a break point. So we're at the end of what I'd say is some softer stuff. What you're seeing is a lot of reading comprehension, right? Kind of learn the details of what the rounds are, different types of anti-trade arguments back and forth. We haven't done a lot of heavy-duty equations, a bunch of supply and demand. So that's what this chapter is we're kind of diving in a little bit deeper into the details of these international arrangements. And so chapter 12 continues that, or chapter 8 continues that thought, focuses more in on people. So, over the last 20 years, a lot of places have tried to do some of this. What comes to mind for that around the world? Harmonization of standards. The EU, right? The European Union. NAFTA, to some degree, right? We reduce trade, but at the same time, standards might start to get developed. So whenever we get into these large trade agreements, these types of issues start to come up. What if countries maintain their own standards? What's the potential tension?
Well, you know, they conflict with other standards. The
Say a little louder.
They conflict with other countries' standards. There are some standards
Okay.
that you use right different from what I use, right?
So how does that translate into negativeness among the producers in each country? Where does the tension come from then?
Goals.
What do standards mean to producers? Put your producer hat on. What do standards mean? Cost. Yeah, and dollars, right? Higher standards means higher dollars. And so if we're competing with each other in the international arena, if there's lower standards in one country, there's lower costs. And that allows them to price their product cheaper if there's good competition. Could lead to maybe some short-run profits if you move to that location, lower cost, but eventually in the long run we'd expect those profits to be competed away. But it kind of changes things, and it might cause a migration of firms that wouldn't otherwise occur if you've got varying standards. And so to come together on standards is a difficult thing to do. Countries are feared to engage in a race to the bottom. I like racing.
It's the lowest common point of acceptance standard.
What's that?
It's a term for leading to the lowest common point of acceptance standard. So quality of credit employed, everything that's there, checks.
So who's the winner in this context? Somebody other than John. Thank you, though. Consumers are the winners. Okay. Partially, I'd agree. Yeah. Who else might be the winner? I guess if there is one in the race to the bottom. So we've got standards. We're thinking about the standards. The high-income countries often fear that laxer standards in other countries might induce domestic firms to
The country that forces the other country to drop down below what they want to go to.
Okay. So whoever's got the race to the bottom is lowering the standards to try to attract those firms in. Those firms come in and set up shop, then maybe their economy starts to grow, maybe it doesn't. But then maybe pollution starts to increase, and even though we got lower prices, we've got pollution or some other thing to have to deal with. Okay, so that is the concept with one of the concepts with standards, the race to the bottom. So here's some data. So income and population. High income countries, so the United States is in here, as well as some of the upper income countries, low income countries. Is there some discrepancy? Yeah. Now, granted, there's, I don't know if this data here has been corrected for what's called purchasing power parity, which we'll learn in chapter 9 and 10, but in terms of how much things are priced differently. But I can tell you for sure, without a doubt, there's not even close to equality here, even taking into account that there's cheaper things, right? So this is real numbers. This is the way the world looks. And what's kind of interesting here is looking at the world population. So how many billions do we got in the world? 7-ish, right? So we've got 1,000 million is a billion. So we got 4, 5, 6, 7 billion is the kind of the world population. And so the majority of these are in this lower middle, not even in the upper middle category. So, does GDP and material things that are associated with income help in other things we might care about? Well, it turns out to be positively correlated with quite a few things here. So, under 5 mortality rates. What does the mortality rate mean?
People die per year.
Yes. So, death under 5. Access to safe drinking water, pretty much everywhere in the high-income countries, as low as 68 in other places. Some pollution. So where do you want to live if you are, if your number one priority that you put all the weight in is pollution? If you want clean air, go to Africa, right?
Oregon.
Right? So we, in these high-income countries, are the polluters. We've got the highest level of emissions per ton. All right, and then we've got the forest over here too. Now, income's one thing. We passed out those sheets before on Jim Gwartney's, our OU grad with the Free the World stuff. I want to look at some of these, the things that weren't on those handouts that I gave you. Oops. These are all available for free, by the way, on the site. Just want to take a quick look at some of the data on freedom.
Is 2013
why
coming
does
out
it
yet?
keep doing that? This is 2013. Well, it's a 2-year lag on the data, just because of national product accounts and the government. Because you're dealing with multiple governments from multiple countries, let alone the United States, takes a while too. So this deals with economic freedom. Remember all the variables that we had. So it's not income. GDP is income. That other data we were looking at on the other slide was on income per person. This is on freedom within the country, the freedom to transact and do things for yourself. So there's the top 10. Noticeable missing is who again? Us. Used to be on there. It used to be 6th, actually. In 2008 it was. So there's the freedom out of 10. Here's the bottom 10.
Yikes.
Venezuela is in deep doo-doo right now. They're running about 56% inflation. So they've got some problems. That's part of the reason. Zimbabwe, I don't know if we'll get into inflation issues in here, but they were running at one point, I can't remember the exact numbers. I got it somewhere in the book, but 2,000% a month inflation. Seriously. Basically, money was worthless. You might as well wipe your butt with it, because the next minute you weren't going to be able to buy anything. So their inflation went to zero, a value of zero. Their currency went to a value of zero. So that's some interesting data. That's why they're kind of low on the list here. How has the world become over time? So this is the Freedom Index number. They just took all of the countries and averaged it. And so it's kind of plateaued here since the crisis. Things were trending up. 6.9 was the highest. 2006, 2007, pretty close. Financial crisis. Things have kind of plateaued on freedom of the average country. That's all the countries around the world. So some of them, like Venezuela, head the wrong direction. The United States has gone down, as we just said. That's what the world's looking like on freedom. All right.
What happened in the
70s. 70s. You mean because it actually went down?
Yeah.
I don't know exactly. I think in the United States, there was more and more government growing. That was the inflation years. We got off the gold standard with Nixon in 1972. So there was some other things in the United States, but that's just one country out of all of them. Soviet Union was still a lot of tensions there. Cold War in the 60s, going into the 70s, whereas the Soviet Union, I think that was part of it. Okay, so per capita income. Now we've got that income variable correlated with the Freedom Index. And so we're seeing income correlated with freedom. Okay, same thing with growth in developing nations. Let's see, that was income. I want to get to this one here. How does income inequality? So the income share of the poorest 10%. The income share of the poorest 10%. So even in the rich countries versus the poor, the least free, we've got that being fairly close to each other. Here's the big difference. Income of the poorest 10% versus in the least free countries. So how much income they have in each type of country, it's a lot more in the freer countries. All right, let's see.
What about income, the top 10%?
What's that?
So what would the stat look like in the top 10%?
In the top 10? Yeah, I'm not sure. All of that's in the report. I mean, the full report is published online, so you guys can go dig through the whole thing. I've got a hard copy of it in my office. I think it's from the previous year, but.
I know it looks really bad for the least free quartile, but it's really, I know it's bad, but is it really that bad? Because I don't know if there's like, so you can use statistics to prove whatever you want. And I didn't know, like, if their inflation rates are a lot lower than ours or anything like that, then $2,000 a year might be a lot to them.
Right, that has been corrected for that. So there is inflation and purchasing power. That's that PPP thing that I was talking about. So those things have been taken into account. So it's more looking at like real GDP or real income. Okay, so political rights, low score. How much freedom goes on here? Civil liberties, the ability to do stuff. I'm just going to kind of zoom through here. Corruption rating. High scores means low corruption. Life satisfaction. Literacy rates, male, female breakdown. Life expectancy. All right. So the reason I wanted to show you that was that when we look at income, and have some correlations, where does that come from? This argues that that comes from freedom of people to do voluntary exchange in the marketplace. So all of that stuff kind of works together to improve the lot of the average Joe. All right, mark your calendars. I'm letting you out early. That's it. Yeah.
Nope, we didn't get any.
Well, that was
Wonderful. Close, we were close. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys.
You said you were going to get an A, and he said,
not a chance.
all right, I'll learn it.
All right, have a good weekend. Remember, all this homework's posted, so if you guys are itching to get started, 5, 6, 7, 8, it's all posted up there with different due dates.
Tonight, if you have procrastinated like I have.
Sunday.